In 2007 came the release of Rob Zombie's Halloween, the remake of the John Carpenter classic, and it made 80.2 million versus a 15 million budget. Pretty good for the Dimension Studios, and obviously with that sort of success comes talk for a sequel. In 2009 we got just that, and I feel that with the original remake that Zombie was given the chance to have half his own vision, but also to honor the original John Carpenter version. So that's why I think Rob Zombie's Halloween is so strong, because as a remake, it does its own thing, but also honoring the original. However, with the sequel, Zombie was given more range to make his own film, and while it made a respectable 39 million versus a 15 million budget, it was panned by critics. The theatrical version was called a mess, a disrespectful film by the fans, a disgrace to the Halloween franchise, and to some extent I agree to this about the theatrical version, because the theatrical version has a lot of issues. The theatrical version is sort of a mix of your traditional slasher film, but also there's hints of what Rob Zombie was trying to accomplish. So inevitably we got the Blu-ray release that came with a director's cut, which was the first version of the film that I saw, and I'll be entirely honest, the first time I didn't get it. I did not understand. The film was so drastically different, having all these strange visuals. Michael Myers' mother with a horse, constantly focusing on Laurie and her like snapping at Annie, her adoptive sister, and constant shots of Michael walking around that made no sense to me. These dream sequences of seeing ghosts that seemed to go nowhere. But thinking about the film kept me coming back for more. Maybe even more so than the original itself. Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 kept calling me back, because maybe on some sort of level I knew that there was something more to this film. And the more I watched it, the more I understood Rob Zombie's vision. And it turns out this vision is my favorite Halloween movie next to the original. Now I know what you're going to say. Alex, this doesn't follow hardly any of the tropes of the other Halloween sequels, or even Rob Zombie's Halloween remake, which it still stands along with all the other Halloween movies. It feels like a Halloween movie, and a lot of people say Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 does not feel like a Halloween movie. And I get that. If that's why you don't like it, that's fine. But for me, I don't think that justifies calling it a bad movie, because that's a lot of the problems that people had with Halloween 3. People said, well, Halloween 3 doesn't have Michael Myers in it, so that means it's bad. And I disagree with that completely. So let's break down the film a little bit. Let's talk about what the overall meat of the story is. The first 15 to 20 minutes are definitely a love letter to the original Halloween 2, the follow-up to John Carpenter's classic, and it takes place in a hospital where Laurie has been transported and she's in recovery, and it turns out that Michael Myers turns up and tries to kill her. And we learned this is all just a dream sequence. And a lot of people were pissed off by that. People don't like dream sequences in movies. However, I think that it perfectly symbolizes Laurie's fear of her older brother coming back and the effect that it's had on her psyche, so that it makes sense for the film to open up with that, because that's the overall theme of the film, is Michael Myers' effect on the five main characters in this movie. So to me, to have this dream where Michael Myers is constantly chasing her and is in control of the situation where she can't get away is fitting. And then we pick up where it's almost 2 years later after the events, and Laurie is living with Sheriff Brackett and Annie, who have both survived the first film. And I mentioned earlier that there are 5 characters that are affected by Michael Myers' rampage in Halloween of 2007. And those characters are Laurie, Loomis, Sheriff Brackett, Annie, and Michael Myers himself. Now, these 5 characters have been affected all in negative ways. And this film seeks to represent how rage and trauma and anger affects a person. And through these 5 people, we get to see that. With Loomis, Loomis has become very, very famous for writing a book about Michael Myers, and he's become this more shadow of his former self. He's become sort of a puppet, almost a like that traditional image that you think of when you think of like a fake TV doctor or a politician that you don't like, somebody that just puts a face on for TV or just to get attention. And he's become this ugly, negative version of himself. And while he seems to like it and seems to enjoy it, maybe he's even fooled himself into thinking that he's enjoyed it, there's something missing. He has no real purpose. All he has is this event to push his life forward, and it's made him into this douchebag of a person. And really, Malcolm McDowell plays this very well. This isn't the Loomis that we even knew from the remake, the first movie, and it's obviously not comparable to Donald Pleasance's performance either, and that obviously made a lot of people very angry. But to me, again, it's a different take on the character. Zombie could have very easily just made another remake, another slasher film, another straight up horror film, but he wanted to do something different with these characters to make something his own. And with Loomis, that's the most prominent because he has a very important character arc, I think. Loomis hits rock bottom near the end of the film like all the other characters. Loomis sees himself on a talk show with Weird Al, and that's where he realizes that his life has become essentially a joke. And then shortly after that, he sees on the news where Michael Myers has yet again captured Laurie Strode, and he automatically feels this responsibility to go out there and try to redeem himself. And now we have Sheriff Brackett, played brilliantly by Brad Dourif. Brad Dourif's performance in this is funny, relatable, and heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. People talk about his performance in Exorcist 3 as being his best, but really, I mean, he was strong in the first Halloween, but in Halloween 2, he shows his acting chops. He is so effective as Sheriff Brackett in this movie. He has a lot of emotional weight to carry. In a lot of ways, he has to be the strength of both these girls that he's trying to raise as a single father that have been traumatized by this so-called monster and serial killer. And often he's making jokes about his age and his weight and trying to bring levity to these girls who are obviously scarred. And then during the last quarter of the film, all of that's torn out from under him, and there's this great scene where just he breaks down, and it's so heartbreaking. It's one of those things where it made the movie feel very, very real, and that's something I want to touch on here later. Annie has a smaller role in this movie, but it's not any less important. She is now sort of the sister figure to Laurie, and she's more there to symbolize how out of touch Laurie is with the original Laurie Strode. You know, the good girl, the girl that's got it all together, the girl that's the nice one of the group. And Annie and her drift further and further, and she dies in the film. And that provides a important character arc for Laurie, because leading into Laurie is a shell of her former self. She's not the nice girl that has it all together, that has the beautiful family. She is constantly having nightmares. She's going to therapy, which isn't helping. She's getting constantly worse, having visions of a mother that she pretty much never knew. And is sharing this insanity that she has with Michael Myers. And it's, at first when I watched this movie all those years ago, I just thought she was just a gigantic ungrateful person, a very mean person. But I soon realized that this is the reactions of a very traumatized individual, and how a human being would react to this when they become unhinged, when they have a traumatic event where they had no control over losing all their friends and her family, and suddenly realizing that they weren't even her family to begin with, because in the middle of the film she finds out through Dr. Loomis's very hurtful book that she is Michael Myers' sister, Angel Myers. And this totally pulls up the last hope that she can return to that original character, to return to the pure Laurie Strode, because she just ends up falling further and further into madness. And Michael, who's sort of become this nomad running throughout this country, this version of Michael Myers is somebody that is clearly, he's obviously more animalistic like he was in the first one. However, he's brought down to a more human level, and that was met with mixed reviews by especially fans and even John Carpenter himself. However, it's a different interpretation of the character. It's not just the same old thing. And we even get to kind of get a peek into his psyche. And this wasn't even something I could really pick up on or understand when I watched it the first couple times. But he constantly sees visions of his mom in this beautiful white dress with this white horse. And the white horse is supposed to represent instinct, purity, and other emotions related to fits of rage. And he sees his mom with this horse, and also his younger self, and his younger self and his mom talk back and forth. And a lot of audiences and critics thought that he was just seeing ghosts, but really this is how his psyche works. This is how Rob Zombie's Michael Myers sees the world. This is how he thinks. It's not his mom talking to him from the grave, it's how he sees his mother. Everybody sees their mother, typically, everybody sees their mother as this beautiful person that is loving and is giving, and that's why he sees her in this white dress with this white horse, and she's constantly speaking to him very, very softly, telling him what to do. Even when it's terrible things, he just does it because mommy told him to. And even Laurie starts to see this vision too, and it's showing how they are linked through this terrible loss they both have, and how Michael Myers' tragic and violent childhood led him to be this nomadic person where he's constantly wandering from town to town to find his sister, because he ultimately wants to be with his mom, but he can't just kill himself because he wants his sister to be there too. And this Michael Myers is almost tragic. He's absolutely tragic in this film, and you almost feel sorry for him. And it's a weird feeling to feel sorry for the boogeyman, especially somebody that's been portrayed in all these other films as this force of nature, this person to be feared. And while he is still somebody to be terrified in this movie because he does a lot of really terrible things, you kind of understand him in a way, but it's shown in such an untraditional way because Michael Myers has never spoken before. So to represent how he sort of has his own inner monologue, the child version of his psyche speaks to his mother, and it's absolutely the mind of a psychopath. And it continues in that theme where Laurie experiences this too. The overall theme of this film is tragedy, a family tragedy. And people ask me all the time, why do you write horror? Why do you write about monsters? Because when they think horror, all they think of is mindless violence and gore. And sure, Halloween 2 has a lot of violence and a lot of gore. It has some of the Rob Zombie tropes that are there. I don't think it's quite as prominent in this movie as it was in the first or even his other films, but they're there. There's less stupid characters, but there are characters there that are obviously there just to get killed off, because this is partially a slasher film that is meant to please the masses, but the director's cut is a lot less like that, because it's close to Zombie's vision as we're going to get for his version of Halloween. And I have to say, Halloween 2 affected me emotionally in a way that the other ones, even the original, never did. None of the other Halloween movies ever made me feel sad or sorry when a character passed away. I felt a very heavy sense of sadness when the movie was over, when the credits start rolling. And it was like a whole new experience that I didn't anticipate watching it this most recent time and the other times. And really, I think that the point of the film hits with Annie's death and Sheriff Brackett's reaction to that death, because, like I said, this movie is basically a family tragedy disguised as a horror film. And that is why I think horror is one of the greatest genres ever, is because you can take themes and hide them inside a story that has monsters and people facing monsters inside of it. You can tell something really compelling. An example I always love to use is Stephen King's It. Stephen King's It is a coming of age story. All those kids have some sort of problem. They've got abusive parents, bullies, they're socially awkward. One of them's a germaphobe with an overprotective mom. All these kids are relatable to somebody on the planet out there. And horror is an excellent way to explore themes that are different, and you can disguise it and put them in there subtly. And I think Halloween 2, that's why it works so well for me personally, because it's essentially, it's a family tragedy. It's about these characters that these 5 characters, only one of them survives. Annie is dead. Loomis ends up getting killed by Michael. Michael gets shot, and so does Laurie, because the effects that Michael's rage and anger and that have stemmed from his abuse as a kid, it's basically just a giant domino effect. He had a bad childhood that affected him, and he went and killed all these people in the first movie. And then Halloween 2 explores the themes and the ramifications of that through these 5 characters. And Loomis becomes a greedy bastard. Laurie is traumatized. Michael is this nomadic that just wants an end to all of his anger and pain. Sheriff Brackett is kind of the guy that's trying to hold everything together. He's the single dad. And Annie is the sister that is constantly being pushed away and has her own baggage similar to what Laurie has. And ultimately, it ends up destroying every single one of them except Brackett. And you could argue, I would argue, that even Brackett ends up losing everything at the end of the film anyway. He loses both his daughters. He loses the target that caused all of this. And he loses Loomis, a person he's been very, very angry at for exploiting the pain of both of his daughters. And ultimately, at the end of Halloween 2, sure, you're not necessarily terrified. You're feeling a different emotion that none of the other Halloween movies will make you feel. And I think Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is, it's a misunderstood masterpiece, and I really love the film. And I understand why people don't like it, and this is just my thoughts on things, and I encourage you to maybe give it another shot if you didn't like it in the past. Definitely watch the director's cut, because the theatrical cut isn't that good. It's crazy how a couple of scenes and a changed ending can change the overall feel of the film. The original ending is very, very gory. It's very Hollywood, where there's a fight between Loomis and Michael, and the director's cut, you don't see any of the violence inside the shack, and Loomis's death is very, very quick, and along with the rest of the characters, and even the song play at the end, it's not John Carpenter's music. In fact, John Carpenter's music is not in this film at all. It's only played during the last couple minutes of the credits, and that's all. It's not in the movie at all. The end of the film has a cover of Love Hurts, which is very, very fitting to the overall theme of the movie. So that's my thoughts on Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, my personal favorite of the Halloween movies. Comment below, let me know what you think. I encourage you again to watch it and to come at it with a different perspective, with an open mind, and see it as a movie. If you're expecting another Halloween movie that is exactly like the others, you're not going to get that. And that's why I love it so much, because it's so daring and trying to be different, and I think it does that very successfully and very, very well. And I think I'll even still like this better than the version that came out this week, the Halloween 2018, because I think the Halloween 2018 will be a lot like the other ones, and sure, will probably be very, very well made, but won't be different enough. And Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is different enough. Thanks as always for watching.